Welcome everyone to our day 2. I really enjoyed our presentations that we just had for our session 3. Thank you for the interesting and thoughtful presentations and dialogue after and fielding questions. We are now on to session 4, focused on curricular approaches. I'm Patty Kubo, or Patricia Kubo. I'm a professor at Indiana University School of Education and co-symposium organizer, along with my co-symposium organizer at the International Institute of Islamic Thought, IIIT, with Dr. Ilham Nasser, and her assistant and part of our leadership team, Salat Pervez, and also from IU School of Education, our leadership glue, and person that you've heard from very often, Daria Dogan. So thank you very much to our leadership team for your help as we go through the symposium. I'd like to welcome everyone, and I will be serving as chair here for the session 4 on curricular approaches. We will begin with Dr. Kajetan Amani, who is from University of Port Harcourt, Nigeria. And the focus of that presentation is redesigning educational curriculum as a tool for counterterrorism in the Muslim world. Lessons from Boko Haram, terrorism in Northeast Nigeria. That will be followed by the video presentation from Masheed Tavali from Queen's University, Ontario, Canada, whose presentation is focused on the vision of the Muslim Middle East in literature for young learners. At that point, then, we will resume and have a Q&A for those 2 presentations. And then after that Q&A with our 2 panelists, we will have Dr. Nasser, who will introduce our final presentation for the afternoon today, which is the special topics presentation for day 2, which is a different type of presentation because it's focused on academic publishing. And many of the presenters and audience members would be interested in how to turn presentations into publishable papers, and that this gives a particular kind of outlet with our journal. So we look forward to having you stay for all of these things, but just to help recognize the flow of this. So we will start now with our video stream for our first presenter.
Redesigning educational curriculum as a tool for counterterrorism in the Muslim world. Lessons from Boko Haram terrorism in Northeast Nigeria. This presentation has an outline which includes motivation, central research objective, central research question, theoretical framework, conceptual framework methodology, Boko Haram in Nigeria, origins, methodology, key findings, redesigning educational curriculum, and conclusion. Boko Haram terrorism has accounted for the destruction of Nigeria's educational sector, with its cardinal philosophy that Western education is abhorrent or evil. This philosophy constitutes the fundamental challenge that Boko Haram poses to Nigeria's educational system. The Global Development Index, the Global Terrorism Index, suggests that deaths attributed to Boko Haram increased by 317% in 2014 to 6,644. From June 2011 to June 2018, more than 35,530 have been killed. 2.5 million people were internally displaced, and nearly 244,000 people became refugees. 956,453 people, nearly 30% out of 3,232,308 private houses were destroyed. 5,335 classrooms have been damaged across primary, secondary and tertiary institutions. There are serial abduction of students, including 276 students of Federal Government Girls College, Chibok, in 2014, and students of Government Girls Secondary School, Dapchi, in Yobe State in 2018, both in the northeastern Nigeria. This suggests the urgent need for a new educational curriculum to address the threats as well as the tyrannical logic of Boko Haram, and to foster and disseminate research in the role of education in social change in the Muslim world. So the central research question is to identify how Boko Haram terrorism has undermined Nigeria's educational system and how designing the educational curriculum could provide alternative measures. The central research question is, what evidence suggests that Boko Haram terrorism has undermined Nigeria's educational system, and how can redesigning the educational curriculum provide alternative measures? The theoretical framework for this study is the rational choice theory. What are the rationales for Boko Haram terrorism? The rational choice theory of terrorism assumes that terrorists act usually from rational, calculated, and conscious decisions. These decisions represent an optimal strategy to fulfill the socio-political goals of these perpetrators. Proponents such as Anderson and Cather argue that when rational choice theory is applied to the study of terrorism, it is important that attention be given to the derived principles of constrained utility maximization. In other words, how do we critically evaluate the key factors that inform such choices as terrorism? And to what extent have such terrorist acts been antithetical to Nigeria's educational system in the particular context of this study, the Northeast, and of course, the Muslim community? The methodology for this study is largely qualitative. Data from Global Terrorism Index, which looks at terrorism in Nigeria, was examined. In fact, there are consistent reports by Global Terrorism Index in the past 3 years that Nigeria has been a leading terrorist country. So we seek to understand how such terrorism has adversely affected the educational sector. We also looked at some case examples of terrorist attacks, such as the kidnapping of the school girls we mentioned, and of course destruction of schools, churches, and similar government institutions. The conceptual framework, we looked at the concept of curriculum and as well the concept of terrorism. Curriculum is planned training experiences with intended outcomes, which recognizes the importance of possible unintended outcomes. It is a central guide for all educators at what is essential for teaching and learning, for every learner to have access to rigorous learning. In other words, curriculum is essential in this case for counterterrorism. On its part, the concept of terrorism, according to United Nations Council 1566, 2004, terrorism is a criminal act against civilians aimed to cause death or serious bodily injury or taking of hostages with the purpose to provoke a state of terror in the general public or in a group of persons or particular persons, to intimidate the population or compel a government or an international organization to do or to abstain from doing any act. Scholars such as Smith identify 3 main elements in defining terrorism. 1, the use or threat of force. 2, political objectives. And 3, the intention of sowing fear in a large population as a means of achieving these political objectives. So what are the origins of Boko Haram in Nigeria? Boko Haram terrorism started as an Islamic fundamentalist movement formed in Maiduguri in 2002 by Mohammed Yusuf, an influential Islamic cleric from Borno State. In 2015, Boko Haram pledged allegiance to ISIS, thereby becoming a global terrorist organization. To date, the activity of the sect has expanded from northeast to the Lake Chad region. And of course, this has increasingly become a major threat to the development of educational sector, as several school children are out of school as a result of fear of kidnapping and similar terrorist threats. So what are the key findings? The major finding of this study is that Boko Haram philosophy, which denigrates Western education, has increasingly accounted for a decline in educational enrollment among the Muslim world. This, of course, has been a major factor as a result of fear of conscription by teens, who are often conscripted as suicide bombers and child soldiers, thereby reducing, of course, enrollment in formal education, as I said. Also, massive terrorist attacks, including the abduction of schoolgirls, burning down of schools, and propagation of alternative teachings and belief systems antithetical to dominant educational system, has also vitiated the rise of education in the Northeast. There are about 45% of school children in the region that have been out of school due to fear of Boko Haram, and of course internal displacement, out-migration, and various forms of terrorist threats and vulnerability. The girl child has been particularly vulnerable because of threats of rape, abduction, and of course child marriage. There's also forceful conscription and occupation of territories and hoisting of Boko Haram flags, and of course the spread of Muslim fundamentalism across the Muslim community against Western education. In all these, what are our major recommendations? First of all, how do we redesign educational curriculum to counter terrorism? First of all, redesigning educational community among the Muslim communities of northern Nigeria has a far-reaching implication for policy, pedagogy, and development. The following steps could be taken to redesign the curriculum for effective counter-terrorism and educational balance. First of all, there is need to adopt active experience curriculum. In other words, to counter terrorist fundamentalist indoctrination and activity, there's need for new and active, or what we call activity curriculum, where new activities aimed at bringing up new modalities and new behaviors, new value reorientation in the curriculum is essential. So adopting activity curriculum will help to change the orientation of both the terrorists and the students. There's also need to adopt subject curriculum to improve the subject matter of what is taught in schools, especially in the context of curriculum, to include issues of counter-terrorism and repositioning of the learner. There's also need to advance teacher-centered curriculum. Thus, teachers should perform more roles in terms of new curriculum and also teaching against religious fundamentalism, which should clearly be assigned to new teachers, as new curriculum could make provision for such responsibilities. There's also need to improve learner-centered curriculum. Here, the learner, the students, should now be in the forefront of learning and also practicing what is aimed at counter-terrorism. In this process, they do it themselves. In other words, they now engage in several practices and teachings that will help them to overcome the indoctrination of terrorism. There's also the need to adopt more integrated curriculum where cultural values and a wide range of items should be included in the curriculum to create new knowledge that can help overcome fundamentalist teachings and, of course, Boko Haram terrorism. So conclusively, without redesigning the educational curriculum, terrorism and Muslim fundamentalism may not be mitigated. The evidence provided in this study expands the understanding of the broader diversity of Boko Haram terrorism, and in our context, how a new educational curriculum could be useful in countering the rising fundamentalist and terrorist profile. This can help understand and assess the future success of education in the Muslim community and the Northeast in particular, and of course, provide a new guidance for a policy direction. Thank you.
Hello, this is Mahshid Taballai, and I'm a PhD student at Queen's University. And the title of my presentation is The Vision of the Muslim Middle East in the Literature of Young Learners. As depicted by this chart and the fact that all educators are aware, the population of diverse students are increasing in the United States. This increase is visible more among the Hispanic, Asian, and people of two or more races. Therefore, as we prepare the next generation of educators, it is imperative to provide them with necessary resources to teach a multicultural population of students. And in this regard, textbooks are a significant resource that teachers normally refer to. However, as Banks notes, history and textbooks are usually written by the victors and those who have gained control over the society, and the victims or powerless are silenced and invisible. As a result, curriculum should not only go through dramatic changes, but as multiculturalists argue, should be reconceptualized to reflect the diversity and contribution of people of color as well. In this research, my main focus is on picture books for young learners as a source of knowledge and curriculum theme for pedagogy. The reason for this selection, as Torres mentions, is early childhood and elementary ages are a setting in which ideas about other cultures are being formed. Thus, it is vital to understand what is being communicated through children's literature. As the statistics by Cooperative Children's Book Center suggest, although the diversity of books is changing among the diverse population of students, but it only reflects certain categories as depicted in the picture. I had always noticed that Middle East is one of the regions overlooked in this category. However, in 2018, the CCBC added an Arab American category, which sounded both rewarding and disappointing of this collection. I immediately start questioning if all Middle East is made of Arabs, or which categories do the non-Arab countries of Middle East belong to? To answer these questions, we should see who Arabs are. Even though Muslim Arabs are the major ethnicity in the Middle East region, they only constitute 1/6 of the world's Islamic population. The majority of Muslims live in Asia, with Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India as the most populated Muslim countries. With that being said, Middle East definition, which is a shifting term, is defined as this picture in my research. Basically, it includes Morocco and Algeria on the west, and ends with Iran and Turkey on the east side or the northern side, as well as the Arab world in the middle. However, we still need to distinguish between Arabs and Muslims of Middle East. Not all Muslims are Middle Easterners. Basically, we have referred to that Muslims in India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan or other South Asian countries. And not all Middle Easterners are Muslims. So we have Jews and Christians in the region, not mentioning other minorities existing in Middle East. Even though Muslim Arabs are the major ethnicity in the region, but we also have nations like Persians, Turks, and Berbers, who are not Arabized after the Arab conquer of the land. We also have to mention the diversity that exists among the MENA region. For example, the languages spoken although it is mostly Arabic, that comes with a variety of dialects, but Turkish, Persian or Farsi, Hebrew, Kurdish, and Berber are other languages that are spoken in the region. And we also have to refer to the Arab and non-Arab countries of this region, not mentioning the Berbers on these maps. The focus of this study is on Muslims. That's why we are not including Israel in this research. But basically, Turkey is a country of around 80 million people, as well as Iran with a similar population. And Berbers of Morocco and Algeria constitute 40 to 50 million people in this region. By these statistics, I want to show that the non-Arab population of Middle East are a significant number as well. Distorted representation of Muslim of Middle East are divided to two phases. One category is before September 11th, that we refer to as the stereotypical image of Muslims that are mostly associated with the Arab of Middle East and is depicted as underdeveloped with nomadic people riding camels in deserts. And it's also kind of like an Orientalist lens. And we also have the incidents that has happened after September 11th, 2001, in which an anti-Arab and anti-Muslim discrimination has been shaped and not only perpetuates a singular vision of a primitive and homogeneous nation, but also introduce Muslims as aggressive and fundamentalist. This research has been informed by critical multicultural analysis as a theoretical framework and aims to use critical content analysis as a methodology to examine the children's literature that depicts Muslims and are published in the North American context. This is a work in progress, and it has been influenced a lot by the pandemic and the lack of accessibility to library materials. But this research contributes to the understanding of how Middle East countries are represented in children's literature, which would inform a positive interaction among Muslim and non-Muslim groups. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope you have enjoyed this conversation and presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our panelists here. We will bring them up and pin them in the boxes here so that you can see people.
I have pinned everybody. Can you all see that?
We can't see the panelists. I need the panelists. Dr. Amani,
And them.
Dr. Ahmadi, and Mashid Tavali. Hi, Mashid.
Hello. Yeah, I'm not sure if Dr. Amani is here.
Oh, isn't he?
I don't know. I'm just wondering because you couldn't find him. I'm not sure.
Here, but I'm unable to spotlight him because his camera is off.
We've been, yeah.
Is his
in and out.
video, if his video is not available, is his audio available?
So sorry, I have to keep making him co-host when his internet goes in and out. So
Yeah.
let's try, go ahead and unmute again. There we go.
Hello, Dr. Ahmadi. And I think you can unmute. And if you're able to move your camera down a little bit or your laptop.
Okay, a little bit down. Okay.
There
Okay.
we go. Oops. Oh, perfect. Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much to our panelists.
You're welcome.
Interesting information. I know we will start with a question posed to Dr. Ahmadi, and this is from Vincent. Okay. He asks, is Boko Haram regularly debated in educational institutions in northern Nigeria? Or is it an ideological appropriation from Boko Haram that doesn't have much resonance in society?
Yes. It's been largely an ideological issue, and that's part of the reason for this study. We're trying to see how, how we could get the issue of Boko Haram internalized in our educational system. It has been largely an ideological challenge, indoctrination, the teaching of Muslim fundamentalism. Islam does not preach violence. So how did Boko Haram evolve with the idea of violence? Mm-hmm. So it is as urgent need to evolve a curriculum that will help the younger generation to understand that, see, Islam is not about violence. The idea of terrorism has no place in Islamic teachings. So it has been largely an ideological issue. So this work is aimed at policy framework to institutionalize the teaching of how to overcome, how to come out of this indoctrination. It has been largely an ideological and philosophical issue. So making it part of the educational sector is where we are working hard to ensure that the younger generation understands the need to internalize the ideological norms of peace against terrorism. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Dr. Ahmadi, this is my question for you. Based on your research and of course life, your lived experiences in Nigeria, what do you see as the forces and circumstances that are contributing to radicalization, to make this of interest, to youth to gravitate toward?
Well, number one is what we call that's a very high level of complicity on the part of the government. State complicity is number one problem, accounting for perpetuation of radicalism. The government has not done enough to guarantee the security of lives and property. Mm-hmm. It's a major issue. And again, within the Lake Chad Basin, there is serious porous border porosity between Nigeria, Cameroon, Benin. The borders are very porous that whoever wants to come in can come in. This made it possible for ISIS to penetrate in the northeast. Another problem is corruption. In fact, most persons, particularly the political elites, are benefiting from terrorism. These are key challenges. So there's need for institutional efforts to teach the young to teach those to say no to the terrorism. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And finally, kind of to bridge what you're saying about these forces and circumstances that have contributed to radicalization, and you put forward to us the notion that an integrated or redesigned education curriculum for Nigeria would be one focused on peace. And my question to you is, how likely is peace education to take root in Nigerian schools when it's in a centralized system where ministry perhaps might also be seen as complicit as part of the government apparatus or government structure?
Well, yes. Generally, peace education is very, very functional, is visible, is practicable, is realizable in Nigeria. Nigeria is a multi-ethnic country of over 250 multi-ethnic groups. They have only 3 major ethnic groups. They have been living peacefully over time. But the issue of radicalism now evolved and destabilized the entire Northeast. Several individuals are internally displaced. So when we redesign the curriculum, it is 100% guaranteed, it is 100% sure that peace education will help to overcome radicalism. Nigerians are very willing to follow, because of this unnecessary complacency on the part of the leaders. It's been a major problem, but peace education will definitely succeed in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for fielding these questions. It's very enlightening to be able to have a presentation focused on Boko Haram. This is probably my first time in many years to be able to have someone addressing this. So I'm excited about your research. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. And Masheed, I'm very excited about your work because this is the practicality of literature for young learners, and it probably has implications for people in teacher education about what they might want to be able to introduce to their pre-service teachers, or even through in-service workshops of integration of this type of literature. So one of the questions or aspects that came in from a participant here in our symposium today is talking about the criteria for inclusion of like the North African region and the Middle East, despite its different colonial history, culture, language. How do you broach all of these different types of cultures, languages, etc., when you're trying to encourage picture books, focused on cultural identity formation?
Let me just thank everyone for this great opportunity to be here. I also have to mention I'm still a PhD student, and it's really a work in progress. So I also really appreciate any feedbacks, and especially like Dr. Nasser mentioned, like I have to be more exact about the information that I use, that I said Israel is the Jewish nation, that it's not true. I really appreciate that. So basically for me, it was also a challenge. So I'm still kind of trying to figure out the exact Middle East region that I'm using. And I was actually thinking probably I should not be including Northern African countries, because it's, as you are mentioning, it's a challenge because it's very different cultures. But that's also another challenge of this presentation of Muslims in picture books. I'm focusing on Middle East region, and we know like Muslims are more widespread than that, but then still within that frame of Middle East, we still have difficulties because first of all, I have been looking at different libraries that we don't, many times we don't have a section for Middle East. And then we also don't have necessarily a section for Muslims. And a lot of times those are words that are used interchangeably. So we do not distinguish the words Muslims or Arabs or Middle Easterners, And then, so these are all the challenges of the work. And I have been trying to focus on, or basically disseminating this information that they are all unique cultures and ethnicities. So that's something that we have to be considering when teaching about the Middle East region, at least. And then also from my point of view that I'm an Iranian, so I know like how Iran has its own culture. And then I had been teaching as an early childhood educator myself. And then I have observed why we have maybe like tons of books about Chinese New Year, Lunar New Year, other holidays and stuff like that. We like Nowruz at least celebrated in Iran, and then like neighbor countries, we have only a few books, and those few books are not even widespread. And then a lot of times they are self-published. So publication industry is a different thing that should be addressed, because many people, when a book is self-published, basically it's not available in all the libraries like throughout the country. So that makes like less book available and less introduction to the cultures and reflection of different like cultural diversity that exists within the Middle East. And I also have seen some books that are very interesting by Pakistani authors. But then I have noticed why they are teaching maybe about Islam, because Islam is kind of like a core theme that's very prevalent in the books. It has a lot of basically symbols and indications of the Pakistani culture, and that Pakistani culture is different from the other countries in the region. So that's why, well, very broad, but I'm trying to first of all like address the diversity that exists in the Middle East region, and then second trying to kind of like so addressing the things that are related to Islam or other basically cultural diversity that exists in the Middle East. And then I'm also looking at the books that is about the everyday life of the basically Muslims or Middle Easterners in general, because that's important that we see how they are depicted today, because sometimes when we hear the Middle East, it's just Arabs, camels, and Islam. So it's not all about that. We have also other aspects of that. And then so I'm trying to kind of like address that, and then looking at the books. I have not my final findings yet, but so far I have seen like some of the I'm categorizing the books that some of them are very much relevant to Islam, and then some of them I'm trying to focus on the ones that are depicting the culture and then disseminating some information about the everyday life of the Middle Easterners or those people in those countries.
Okay, so you were using like a content analysis for the picture
Yes.
books? Okay, because that would be helpful to think about what are the kind of connective tissues or themes that are crossing those books, seeing what is available and taking that as your base from which you're drawing, these findings in relation to how is culture presented? Whose culture is it? What type of, so whose culture, what's featured, and of course, what's not featured. And then the whole notion of perhaps Muslim identity. I know the topic here in the title of your presentation was looking at a vision of the Muslim Middle East. And I'm just wondering if perhaps Muslim identity might be the core, and you're looking at the picture books in relation to that.
Because when we talk about Middle East, it's mostly, not all, but mostly Muslim populated. So that's why the Muslim comes up, but I didn't want it to be that's necessary, like to be my necessary focus. But then at the same time, I couldn't detach it from like Middle East from that Muslim identity, which is very prevalent in the area. Mm-hmm. And then also in the books that I have been visiting, so a lot of the topics were either about Islam itself or have been illustrating Muslims, with hijabs or whatever that we have, like all the connotations that comes with a Muslim. So that's why I saw it not be able like to separate it. That's why it's kind of like there, although I didn't want it to be my necessarily focus of the study.
Or perhaps because there's the issue of religion, there's culture, there's stereotypes, there's the combating the stereotypes. Maybe the focus or thrust of your doctoral work is cultural identity formation. And then what are these books suggesting about cultural identity, for particular populations that they're directed towards?
Actually, I love that. I should think about that. Yeah, I like cultural identity because so far I was like thinking about Muslim identity and cultural representation, like having them both as a cultural identity. I had not thought about that, to be honest.
Then it's not putting the onus on you to define, but you're allowing the books and how authors took their picture books and what they're putting forth as representations about cultural identity formation. Right. And so I wrestle with this in my own work. That's why I bring it up too. I do a lot of work in Jordan. And the way I'm kind of talking about is around cultural identity markers or markers of identity, things that are contributing to identity formation for youth or for children. And religion is one, language is another, cultural values and norms is another. And then also to be critical in the approach by saying, okay, to what kind of positions are these children being summoned or youth being summoned by the official curriculum? And then what don't they learn about? you know, and hence the need perhaps for some of these picture books, or to use the picture books to help kids engage in critical, you know,
Right.
thinking about it. Okay.
And you know, Patty, if I just may add, you know, you might want to also look into what's on the shelf and in school libraries and what's not, because there's a huge movement towards banning books on, especially on Palestine in the US, and lots of the books that were written culturally on the culture are out of the school libraries for young children.
I would definitely start there too. I would just echo what Dr. Nasser said, kind of starting, what are the books available?
To be honest,
and then, and a list of the titles of those books. Yeah.
yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you, Dr. Nasser, as well. And then, but this is, so that's how it, like my research just started, because a lot of times I didn't find much on the shelf. That was also kind of like the reason for this research, because yeah, I don't see much out there. And then a lot of them, well, yeah, it is like about, you know, it's like mostly like the cliches, like introducing Islam, fasting, you know, not about the cultural activities, like every day of the Muslims. And that makes them also kind of like, we talk about Orientalism, you know, so that makes them kind of like in an exotic being, you know, that and a stereotypical one, because they don't let like much information out about that.
And then just last question. I know you've had a number of them that you've been fielding here. The last one is, have you found any picture books that include Kurdish culture in Middle Eastern literature?
Actually, I'm still looking for that because I have been studying at the University of Kurdistan in Iran, and then I'm kind of like familiar with the Kurdish population, and it is of my interest. So although we know that we don't have a distinct country as Kurdistan, but then because of the good population of the Kurds that exists like in the Middle East, I have been interested in that topic. I have not really found good Kurdish books so far, to be honest, but I'm still looking for that. But then it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's very tricky because it's very hard, because like, for example, I checked on New York Public Library. It had a lot of books, but because they don't have a Middle East section or anything like that, it's very hard. Like I have to really look for books. So that makes it one of the challenges of this work. So so far I have found like the Library of Wisconsin-Madison that I just noticed in the, I mentioned it in my research, that it has the Arab category that I didn't find it quite accurate, and it has been from 2018. And also like Arizona University is one of the things, places that I'll be looking at, providing a lot of international books, and also has a Middle East section. But it's very challenging to find the books. And then I know within the Iranian community, it's we have self-published books, but because they are not out available, so it's hard to find. You know, I have really to go to the Iranian communities to find that. And I can do it with the Iranian community because I'm kind of familiar with, but then it's hard to do it with all the other communities within the Middle East region, you know?
Right. And just for sake of time, I just want to say, you know, good luck to you with your exploratory study and helping to conceptualize it. And thank you to both of our panelists here today. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Nasser, who is going to introduce our third panelist and the special topics regarding academic publication. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty, and thank you everyone for the previous panel.
Thank you.
I'm happy that Dr. Ahmadi, you were able to be with us despite the action. Please stay with us to hear some more about demystifying the academic publication process, breaking it all down to set a foundation for success. We will start with a video record.
God, thank you very much.
Yes,
I'm
gone now.
Okay, thank you. So Dr. Anastasia Collaja, we recorded her presentation, and we will listen to that first, watch it, and then we'll have a Q&A with her. I hope that you will find it as beneficial as we do, and she will be available. We saw that she's on. She will be available live to answer any questions you may have. This is with an orientation to what to do after this presentation. Very often we do presentations, but we don't carry them further because of a lot of reasons. So hopefully this will be a good motivation to continue and to get some more information on the requirements to turn the presentation into publication. So Christy, please go ahead. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Anastasia Collaja. I use she, her pronouns, and I am currently sitting in Tampa, Florida at the University of South Florida in the United States. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So today I am thrilled to be discussing demystifying the academic publication process, breaking it all down to set a foundation for success. I am at Intu University of South Florida. I am a senior instructor of English and also an adjunct professor of English, again, at the University of South Florida. I want to begin my presentation, as I begin all of my presentations, with the land acknowledgement. As I presently sit on the traditional homelands of the Tocobaga, Calusa, and Seminole peoples. Today, Florida is home to the Seminole, Miccosukee, and Muskogee and Choctaw groups. Individuals of other Native groups likewise reside here. I wish to recognize the historical and present impacts of colonization, violence, and displacement on Indigenous communities here and in other places. So today I am thrilled to be discussing the publication process and breaking it all down and discussing everything from the abstract to the conclusion and the introduction. And yes, there is a reason why I am saving the introduction for last, and we'll be discussing that towards the end. So the reason why we are talking about this today is that I have had the pleasure of being able to review a lot of different manuscripts and papers from students to scholars who are coming from around the world. And what I'm finding, what a lot of other people are finding, is that the ideas that are coming out are rich and innovative and incredible, but they're not getting disseminated. They're not getting published, mainly because of this English barrier, because a lot of publications, if not most publications, are in English. And if you don't have a strong foundation in English, and also an understanding of how the publication process works in English-related or journals, then you are at a disadvantage where you're not going to be able to get your work out there. So I am partnering with different journals and different editors to be able to bring different manuals and videos and helpful hints, and to be able to work hopefully with international scholars one-on-one to be able to give you the tools to get your really important work out there. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the abstract. Now, the abstract is probably going to be the very last thing you'll write, just like the introduction. But the abstract is basically a snapshot of your work. It's a snapshot of your study. And it's usually broken down to about 6 to 7 sentences, 150 to 250 words. You want to look at the big picture. You want to understand the gap that you're trying to address. You want to show how your paper is going to fill that gap and discuss what materials you're going to use. At the very end, you want to talk about the general results as well as the implications for your readers. So in other words, what are they going to take away from this paper by sitting down and by reading it? Again, it's a snapshot, and they should be able to have a pretty good understanding of your study at the end of your abstract. All right, so because we're going to talk about the introduction last, we're going to jump right into the literature review. Now, the literature review can be a complicated animal. As I've worked with a lot of international scholars and students, the lit review is the thing that gives them a lot of trouble, in addition to some domestic students as well, because you have to review the past research and you have to cite that research properly. And then you have to be able to articulate how your idea fits into the existing research. So I have a kind of a do and don't list for you. And I talk about crafting your literature review. And I say crafting, as do a lot of other people, because the more studies that you read, and we'll go ahead and we'll use a puzzle because my 6-year-old loves puzzles. Every study that you have, every study, you bring another piece of the puzzle. And by the end of your lit review, you should have a completed picture in front of you where you understand where all the studies have come together to be able to better justify your own research gap and your own idea. So read widely. It is so important to read as widely as possible, and then categorize your studies carefully. Understand the different themes that your idea brings, but also understand what themes have inspired your idea in the first place. So it's really important to be able to read widely. You want to be able to justify your gap. When you are reading widely, it is really important to keep track of your key words. You need to understand what keywords work. You want to understand what keywords may not yield as many studies. And you want to be able to keep track of each study question, the methods, results, and implications. And I do this in a chart form. I don't write complete sentences. I just do some bullet points. This can help me to synthesize and put my ideas together in that discussion section. It saves you a lot of time, again, if you keep track of your studies in either a PDF or printout. Nowadays, everything is digital. So unless you print out all of your articles, having kind of a folder in your desktop or on your laptop or on your USB drive that's accessible with a Word doc that has a chart where you can keep track of all of these different studies will be very helpful. In addition to that, having a separate doc that keeps track of your entire reference is also going to be really helpful. Now, there are a lot of different citation machines to help you with this, but they are not always 100%. So it's always a good idea to just keep track of all your citations, either in a citation machine or on a Word doc. I love a good old-fashioned Word doc because it's editable and it's right there. And I also can edit it carefully to make sure that I'm not making mistakes in italicizing and capitalization and punctuation, because the citation manual, whether it's APA or MLA or Chicago or the like, are very exact and they are very specific. All right. The next thing to always make sure that you do is you want to review the studies critically and compare and contrast the findings among each other. The more you're able to compare and contrast what they have in common, the similarities and the differences, the better chance you'll have to solidify explaining your own research gap. And you want to choose studies which will help you to better solidify your research gap. But you don't want to be subjective. You don't want to give opinions. And you also don't want to include studies that do not contribute to your research topic. Now, that doesn't mean to only choose studies that will support your topic. You want to make sure that you include studies that include a wide breadth of knowledge and a wide breadth of perspectives and ideas. You don't want to shy away from those studies that may not support or might be semi-contradictory to your own work or to your own research. Those studies are going to help to enrich your own study, and will also help a lot when it comes to limitations, et cetera, which we will also talk about a little bit later. Also, again, do not forget to cite all sources properly, be they are quotations or they are paraphrasing. You need to make sure that you cite all sources properly. All right, so once you have your lit review and you've solidified your research gap, now it's time for the methodology and the results section. Now, your methodology section is the section where you should be able to write down exactly what you did and how you conducted your study, which means your reader should be able to read the methodology section and be able to duplicate that work. You want to include your participants, you want to include your location, you want to include general background. And then what I like to do with the methodology is I like to organize it by research question and how I am going to analyze my data. I'm not going to give my results yet, but I'm going to discuss how my data is going to be analyzed. Sometimes I can do that in a chart form, especially if I have a mixed method study where I'm dealing with quantitative data and I'm dealing with qualitative data. Sometimes it's just simple prose. Once you have written your methodology section, you want to make sure that you have your results section in a very clear and concise manner. The results section is only for your results. Okay, you want to make sure you're not evaluating, you're not explaining, you're not arguing, you're not commenting. There's time for that in the next section, the discussion and implication section. And that is going to be the section that might take the longest time to write and to explain and kind of put together. And then finally, of course, in the results section, this is where you can add your charts, your tables and figures. Make sure they're clear, make sure they are not overused, and also make sure that they are explained. You do not just want to plop a chart or a table in there and think that that is going to be self-explanatory. You want to make sure that you foreground it with an introduction, you have your chart or your table, and then you want to point out the key ideas that you want your readers to pay attention to the most. That will also help you as you move into your discussion and implication section. The discussion section is probably one of my favorite sections of the research paper because I get to show my readers, my reviewers, or whoever is reading my paper, how my study fits into the existing literature. I get to make my case for my study to be part of the research conversation. So I have here synthesizing and etching your space in the research conversation, because it really is truly a conversation, isn't it? The more that we read, the more presentations that we engage in with each other's work, we're going back and forth in conversation with our findings and our ideas, and we take them in new and different directions. And so when you write your paper, when you contribute your knowledge, you are contributing to that important conversation. So this is where you highlight the key findings. You relate your findings to past research. Acknowledge your limitations, absolutely, but show how your research belongs in the conversation. And the way you can do that, the easiest, is to be able to produce implications. How can people use your results? What do these results mean in practical terms? How can we use those ideas that you're bringing to light in whatever field, in whatever topic? And of course, coming to this conference, I see there are so many important topics to look at and so much important work happening. So how are they able to be, so how are the findings able to be practically implied is going to be crucial for your reader to understand. Again, do not include studies that support only your results. Do not focus on your limitations. Again, they're not negative. And you don't want to over-generalize or overreach your findings. You want to make sure that you're able to discuss ideas and key findings that you can back up your claims on. So really quickly with limitations in future research, when you're talking about limitations, again, as I said, they're not negative. You want to identify them before your reviewers do. So when you're going through the publication process and you have these different reviewers, you want to acknowledge the different places where your studies might have fallen short, like size and generalizability are the most common limitations to studies. And then you want to use your future research directions to offer possible solutions as you move your ideas forward in new and possibly innovative ways. So you want to be able to show your reader that, yes, you know, this is my idea, these are my findings, this is my discussion, these are the implications. Oh, but the conversation isn't over yet. We can continue in this direction and in this direction. And sometimes that helps to take care of some of the limitations that you mentioned in your limitation section. So the conclusion can be a pretty daunting area. Especially because after you've done all of the work, a lot of times people say, well, how do I end it? Or sometimes beginning scholars, international scholars, and other students of mine just basically forget the conclusion section. They finish a discussion section and limitations, and here's my future research and the conclusion. So the conclusion is the very last part that will be read. It will be the last thing the reader will remember. You want to make sure simply that you just restate the topic, the argument, the key findings, and then your final thought. Your final thought, make sure it's memorable, but make sure it's not out of nowhere. Make sure it's not, as we would say, out of left field. Make sure that it can be connected. Make sure that the reader can connect to it without thinking that it's not somehow related to your whole study. And that's one of the biggest pitfalls of a conclusion, is that you might have such a great idea, but it kind of comes out of nowhere because it's not as connected to your study as it could be. So after you finish your fantastic conclusion, you want to go back and you want to write your introduction. Now, your introduction is essentially showing your reader the big picture. This is not the abstract where you show your whole snapshot. This is the big picture kind of overview that you have before you get into the lit review and before you get into the rest of your paper. I love to start inspirational. I am mostly a qualitative research with a bit of quantitative mixed in. So I can start with quotes. I can start with inspiration. If you're in a different field, maybe statistics. Something that is going to grab your reader's attention and say, oh, I didn't know that, or oh, that's really reflective. Something that's going to keep them reading. You don't want to overthink the introduction. You want to get the reader's attention, state your position if applicable. Very, very brief lit review, maybe a couple of very key studies that you might focus on a lot more. And then you want to get into your research gap and then your overall study overview. And that's it. But you definitely want to make sure that you briefly address that research gap in your introduction as you start setting up your whole study. So this is a brief overview of the publication process and the different parts of the research paper. Luckily, I am in the process of developing a manual that should be out in the next couple of weeks, as well as an accompanying video to be able to expand upon some of the key areas of publication, such as, again, the lit review, synthesizing, and of course, quoting and paraphrasing and using APA or any style book that your journal requires appropriately. So make sure that you proofread, make sure you check APA formatting, and there are several sites to do that, and make sure that you cite quotations and paraphrases appropriately. As well as the final thing, if it's possible, write about what you are passionate about. Write about what you enjoy. Write about things that you want to research, if it's possible. I know that in some cases we can't always write about everything that we're passionate about, but at least try to when you have a chance. If you can't write about what you're passionate about, hopefully make sure that the work that you do is important, and make sure that it can contribute to the research conversation. So I want to close with a quote, and it says, first, organizing it on paper isn't just academic, it's an applied prerequisite for manifestation. And so it's very important that we are able to manifest our ideas and make them come alive, and enjoy what we write if that's possible. Finally, we need important research from all around the world. If this symposium has taught us anything, it is that we need all of the research being discussed here and all of these amazing, innovative, invigorating, critical presentations. And we need them to be able to be distributed widely in manuscript publications. So I hope that this video is able to help you in that process. And I hope that I'll be able to read your research in different publications, including the journal that is being represented here. So in conclusion, please contact me. I have a LinkedIn. I also have an Instagram. I also, of course, have an email. So I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so very much. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are around the world listening to this now. And take care. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. I believe you're here somewhere. So I hope you can. Here we go. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much, Anastasia, and thank you for joining us. I listened to your presentation before our today, and I'm sure our audience has questions. I haven't asked people to put them in the chat, but we have one that says, how can we choose good, reliable sources for quality research? And I'm thinking this is about the lit review. How can we choose good, reliable sources for quality research? Probably about the lit review. How can you choose those pages that are key and good quality?
A lot of times that has to do with access. And sometimes that can be really hard if you don't have a good library of sources, but sometimes a lot of scholars can really help you out. And so if you find an article that you really like, or you find a scholar who you really admire and you find their work and it's going to be about $29 or $30 to buy, or email them. And sometimes they will actually share the PDF with you, because sometimes we get multiple free copies to disseminate to anybody who needs them or who wants them. And yeah, so a lot of it has to do with accessibility, and that's not a lot I can say on that, but that's why I always try to open, and I always try to do open access journals and things. I don't always like to do just a strict peer reviewed where only certain people can read my work. But sometimes, of course, as you know, when we're coming up in academia, that's something that's required to do. But don't be afraid to reach out to other scholars who, if you want their work, they're probably going to send it to you. We don't always get paid for publication, so we're very happy to share if you ask.
Most of the time.
Most of the time.
I have, go ahead, Patty.
Oh, I was just going to mention, thank you so much, Anastasia, for the great presentation. I think I'll be using it with my graduate students, if that's okay with you as well.
Absolutely. I'll use it for mine too.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I would just share, with the audience, for all of us, it's really easy to forget that those who have recently published, when you're reading something that's really good, something central to your work, look immediately at their bibliography, their references, because to be published, they had to reflect a current, thorough, thoughtful lit review. And that immediately puts you on to who are scholars in the field and more people to get to. So then you start to see who are the names that kind of coalesce of often spoken about, and then going to their material and finding more things on that name.
Yes.
Or people who refute those. You kind of see who's in the camp of, opponents to it, refuting it. But it's just I always tell my own students that at IU, it's an automatic source to look at what people have already done to be able to get published. And if you even have 5 pieces in front of you that are quality sources, to answer that question from Fava, then just go to those pieces. You already have automatically probably at least 15 times 5, 75 sources that may be helping you to be relevant with your work.
Absolutely. Yes. The reference section. Yes, absolutely. I think I was speaking more to accessibility. That was the first thing I thought of. But yes, yeah. I mean, if you have the access, the references, always the references. Yes. Thank you for that.
But you bring up a really good point about not forgetting human resources, going straight to that author and asking them for more of their work as well, if there's an email address, or looking up and searching for their institution. Thank you.
And people are usually generous with sharing their work because they really want their work to be widespread. The next question for you, Anastasia, is assuming that most of the people who want to publish are publishing research and field-based work, what do you think are the most important components of an article that is not research-based, that is just a theoretical, a review, an analysis of some sort?
I think one thing in my experience is it needs to be current, something that's really current, something that if it's not going to be new as far as like an actual research, it has to kind of have a new fresh take on a certain issue. Or if you're doing, let's say, for example, a scientific literature review, or I'm sorry, a systematic literature review. You want to kind of have a new fresh take on whatever hasn't been done yet. You're not doing the research, but you're saying, oh, wait, here's a gap. So you really want to make sure that you solidify that gap and show how that gap can be manifested and taken in different directions. I think that that's probably one of the most important things to keep in mind in that regard. And I apologize if the TV is on. My children are home. It's Veterans Day and they both just got vaccinated. So they're just like zonked out in front of the TV today.
That's okay. Thank you for being with us, despite the fact you said that it's Veterans Day and a lot of people are off in the US. I think the question that comes, that just came is also an important one regarding, so what happens once you submit your paper? And sorry, I'm trying to get to that. What happens when you submit your paper and the review process?
It's from Steve, and
yes.
it says, could you go over what happens after you submit your paper to a journal initially, and any advice if we get revised, resubmit?
Yeah,
Sure.
I can, Anastasia, I can say something about GEMS just because I'm the co-editor, and then I'll give that to you. Since we are actually hoping that most of these presentations, people who are here in the audience, our hope is actually that these presentations will develop into publications for GEMS. And GEMS, which is the Journal of Educational Muslim Societies, is a new one. This is our 4th year. And of course, we will be indexed once we pass the 5 years threshold. In GEMS, what we do is that the article will first, the submission will go through the co-editors. We will review it first. I have another co-editor with me. And then we will see if it's fit or not to move into the blind review process. 2 people, experts in the area and the field, will review the manuscript without, of course, revealing the name of the author or authors. And then once we get the feedback back, we immediately send it to the authors and ask them to address all the comments of the reviewers. And sometimes people might agree or disagree with the comments, and we ask people, which is a common practice, to say why you don't agree, why is this specific to your manuscript, why is it important for you, things like that, so they can just write a page or whatever bullet points regarding the reviews and what aspects of the reviews they agree with versus that they don't agree with. And then it comes back to us, and then we will work from there depending on whether the authors address the reviews or not. And the second point is that Anastasia has been working with us as a mentor for people who are publishing, and the English is not their academic language. It's not their language that they use when they write professionally. And she's been very helpful with us on that. So that's something we have been establishing with GEMS, and she works with the author before it goes to the reviewers. And Anastasia, please add to that.
Yeah, you've covered basically everything. I think the one thing I want to add is, I don't know what it is. It might be a cultural thing, or it might just be a misunderstanding, but feedback is not a bad thing. And I think that as I've worked with people and it gets to me and I say, okay, go ahead and fix this and this. And, I slowly kind of do kind of a cursory, kind of a general feedback first before I get into the nitty gritty. And then they send it back and they're really happy. And I send back with more feedback. I'm like, wait, there's more? I'm like, well, yes, but that's okay. It's not, you didn't do a bad job. It's not a bad thing. It's okay. We are working through this together. So I think that there's definitely a modicum of frustration with the review process if you don't understand the multiple rounds of feedback it might take before an article is going to be published. The best you can possibly get is accept without revisions, which doesn't ever happen. At least I haven't ever had that happen before. Accept with revisions, or revise and resubmit, or a flat out rejection. Revise and resubmit is not a bad thing. Revise and resubmit means, hey, we like this, but there's still a little bit more to do before we can fully think that we can fully accept it, but we're giving you another shot. We're giving you another chance. And I think that a journal like GEMS does a lot with the revising process than typical journals tend to do. And it's really more of like a really great kind of mentoring partnership, which is really what publications should be. There shouldn't be, again, soapbox for a second. There shouldn't be a lot of gatekeepers in the publication. There shouldn't be people who just rip your manuscript to shreds just because they can. I really do appreciate the types of journals that really try to partner with you and say, hey, this is good. It could be better. It's not quite publishable yet, but we can get it there. Because I really do feel, and as I've been working with various people in my years of working with international graduate student scholars, anybody can publish as long as we have the right tools, the right mentoring, the right partnerships, as long as we can empower. And I think that that's the most important thing, is to empower people. And I think the other thing we also heavily rely on these days is just editing and saying, oh, hey, I got this idea, now fix it for me, make it perfect, and then go ahead and get it published for me. That's not empowering, right? That's not, that's kind of taking this other way out. And what do you learn from that? So I really do enjoy just a time to be able to work with authors, to have even mentors work with me in my own publications. And yeah, there might be a lot of rounds of feedback, but in the end, seeing your name in print, there's,
Amazing.
I see that our managing editor added information here about indexing, that we are currently indexed in JSTOR, ProQuest, EBSCO, and ATLA. Thank you, Huda, for that. And Anastasia, publication and publishing in English, I don't think it should discourage people from submitting manuscripts, because that, like you said, that was an experience where people got so, frustrated with the process. But if the paper was reviewed by 2 blind reviewers and they said the paper is good, except for language issues, the flow, or things that are just technical related to English, then we will not reject the paper once it's been reviewed and accepted, and the author took care of the reviewers' comments, then we will move it forward and provide the assistance to get it, copy edited, which is a very important process in the publication pipeline.
Yeah, and everybody gets copy edited, even domestic speakers. Everyone goes through copy editing. Just making that clear. It's a process for everybody. Yes.
True. Yes. All right, Patty, anything else you would like to add, or if people have other questions in the chat? We're urging you again to do the evaluation forms. And before I forget, Anastasia mentioned in the video that there is a manual to accompany this presentations. This will become available on our website, and please check with us. We're happy to share all of that with you all, whoever attended the symposium too.
I would just add maybe the address to get to the journal, so people could see a past issue and look at the types of things that are published. That might be good for everyone in the audience.
Yes, thank you. And Huda can probably enter that. And I don't have it. Do you have it? Okay, or Saulat will do that. Wonderful. That's a good idea. Thank you, Patty. Okay, so should we give people time to take the evaluations?
Yes.
And thank you again. Thank you, Anastasia.
Thank you so much
for being with us despite your kids and being on a holiday. And thanks for staying and sticking around. And a wonderful day. Don't forget to come back tomorrow.
Yes, everyone, please, we'd love to have you for Friday as well for our session 5, which will focus on gender and sociocultural factors, and our session 6, looking at the practical integrative pedagogical models.